Today's session is about data collection methods, and it is a very important session regarding your research design. So, the first part of our lecture is about classifying our data type. The method of data collection largely depends upon the type of data you are collecting. So, there are two major approaches to gathering data or information, which are secondary sources and primary sources. So when the information required is already available to you and you only need to extract that information, it is called as secondary sources. Okay. So for instance, if you are investigating the effect of foreign direct investment on GDP growth rate of the country, data regarding both the variables, foreign direct investment and GDP, they are already available on government's statistical and monetary reports. Just need to extract them, and this is one of the examples of secondary sources of data. Uh, for instance, another example would be the use of census data to obtain information on the age, gender, structure of a population. So this could be also a secondary source of data. On the other hand, when you need to collect the required information firsthand, that is called as primary data. It means that the information is not already available. You need to collect that information for the very first time. So the three popular primary sources of data include observations, interviewing, and questionnaire. So these are the three primary sources of data. We will discuss them in detail in today's session. So first of all, let us discuss secondary sources of data. The four main secondary sources of data include the government sources, the corporations, the previous research conducted on some topics, and mass media. So when we talk about government, there are many government and semi-government organizations that collect data on a regular basis in a variety of areas and publish it for use by public and some interest groups. Some common examples are the census reports, vital statistics like labor force surveys, health reports, economic forecast, and demographic information. So these are all reports which are published by many government and semi-government organizations. Similarly, publicly listed corporations produce annual reports which include vital statistics regarding their performance indicators. So, for instance, if you are investigating the relationship between return on investment and dividend payout ratio, okay, listed of companies which are listed in Shanghai Stock Exchange, and that information is already available in the annual reports and financial statements of those companies. You just need to extract those reports. If you want to measure the historical pattern by looking at the data of last 10 years, then you need to look at the annual reports from 2010 to 2020 to extract data of companies listed in Shanghai Stock Exchange and extract the required information about their return on investment and dividend payout ratio. So this is also one of the very popular sources of secondary data. Earlier research means research published on some topic, especially for some areas, for some topics, an enormous number of research studies that have already been published by other researchers can provide you with the required information. So this could also be a secondary source of data. Lastly, mass media. Mass media can also, be a source of secondary data. The reports published in newspapers, in magazines, on internet, and so on may be another good source of data. Overall, the most popular sources of secondary data are published research papers, government publications, annual reports of the firms, publications of authorized bodies like United Nations, like IMF, like World Bank. All these could be a very important source of secondary data. So when we talk about secondary data, you often need to differentiate between panel data and time series data. The key difference between time series and panel data is that time series focuses on collecting observations about a single subject over a period of time, while panel data focuses on collecting observations about multiple subjects over a period of time. So let me give you an example to clarify the difference between these two data configurations. Uh, so in the example, investigating the relationship between return on investment and dividend payout ratio of the companies listed in Shanghai Stock Exchange, we discussed in our last slide. If you are focusing on a single company, okay, if you are focusing on a single company where observations for that single subject are collected over a period of time, that would be time series data. But if such observations are collected for multiple companies or multiple sectors over a period of time, then it would be recorded as a panel data. So you need to differentiate between panel data and time series data, because your analysis, tools, your analytical tools, they change for time series data, and they are different for panel data. So, how is literature review secondary data? Can a research paper written solely on the basis of literature review? This is a vital question. So, your assignment number 2 relied on secondary source of data because it was your literature review assignment. So, you were supposed to write literature review on the basis of the research which has been published already by other researchers on the topic of your investigation. So yes, literature review can be a secondary source of data, and you can publish a research written solely on the basis of literature review. So because you're not collecting new information, which you do for primary sources of data. So those research projects which rely only on the findings of previously published research are called as literature review papers. So they can be meta-analysis as well. For instance, in the example mentioned in your slide, this is a meta-analysis focusing on male-female differences in burnout. These researchers analyzed the findings of 183 previously published research papers on the topic of burnout, and they tried to find out how the effect of burnout on genders is reported. So meta-analysis can also be a source of your secondary data. So we mentioned about meta-analysis I think in our second unit while we were discussing about the problem statements, because I advise you that meta-analysis can be a very vital source of information if you are discussing about some topic, because meta-analysis organized the previously published research on that particular topic in a very systematic way. So you can also refer to meta-analysis as a secondary source of data. Okay, so these are the this is my discussion regarding the secondary source of data. You can see whether you are consulting any of these sources for your investigating your research problem. All of you are focusing on earlier research while writing your literature review. Okay, but we will not call your research as a secondary source of data, because I think all of you are collecting primary data as well. So all of you are collecting new information. I won't say that all of you are collecting primary data, because some students are also relying on the financial reports and economic reports of governments. So some of you are collecting secondary data as well. So majority of the students, they are utilizing primary sources of data, and all of you have consulted earlier research in writing your assignment number 2. So I think all of you have used secondary sources of data as well while writing your literature review. Okay, so now let us discuss our next topic, primary data. So primary data is the data which you collect for the very first time, and because you are collecting it yourself, the quality of the primary data can vary. So you need to keep these two important points in mind, because these two important points can have a direct impact on the quality of the data collected. The first important thing is the socioeconomic demographic characteristics of your population. You should know as much as possible about characteristics such as education level, age, structure, socioeconomic status of your population, because some populations, for a number of reasons, may not feel either at ease with a particular method of data collection, such as interviews, or they may not be comfortable with expressing opinions in questionnaires. Moreover, people with little education may respond differently to certain methods of data collection compared with people with more education. The younger age groups may be disinterested to respond to your questions if topic of research does not interest them. Therefore, quality of data can vary depending upon your population. So you need to keep this thing in mind while collecting data through primary sources. Secondly, the way you explain the purpose and relevance of your study can also have a significant impact on the quality of data. Whatever method of data collection is used, make sure that respondents clearly understand the purpose and relevance of the study. This is particularly important when you use a questionnaire to collect data because in an interview situation, you can answer a respondent's question on the spot. But in electronic questionnaires, for instance, you electronically send questionnaires, but you will not have this opportunity to clear any doubts about the research. If your respondent has any doubt about any question, you will not have any opportunity to clear that doubt. So these are the two very important points which can affect the quality of the primary data, your social, economic and demographic characteristics of the population, and how you explain the purpose and relevance of your study to your respondents. If it is explained well, you can be sure that you will get some good responses. But if it is not explained well, different respondents will perceive your questionnaire differently, and consequently, the quality of the responses will be different as well. Okay, so let us discuss our first main method for primary data collection. It is observation. Now, observation is one of the most appropriate way to collect data when you are more interested in the behavior than the perceptions of individuals. For instance, if you are interested in how people within the team interact with each other to accomplish team tasks instead of their perceptions or attitude towards teamwork, observation is the most appropriate method to do so. So there are two types of observations, participant observation and a non-participant observation. Let us differentiate both types. In participant observation, you as a researcher participate in the activities of the group in the same manner as its members, with or without their knowing that they are being observed by you as a researcher. For instance, you might want to study the reception of new iPhone model in the Apple Store by consumers, and you pretend to be consumer yourself. You listen to what consumers say to each other while evaluating new iPhone model, and you record it. Or you want to study how prisoners interact with each other, and you want to know about daily lives of prisoners. So you will pose yourself as a prisoner, in the cell, and get to observe the behavior of the prisoners by being one of them. This is participant observation. On the other hand, when you are engaged in non-participant observation, you as a researcher do not get involved in the activities of the group, but you remain as a passive observer, watching and listening to its activities and drawing conclusions from the group activities. For instance, in the prison example, you as a researcher would only watch, follow, and record the activities as they are performed by the prisoners. So the observational research can be conducted in the natural setting or in the controlled setting. When you as a researcher do not get involved in the activities of the group, and you try that group follows its natural operation and you don't interfere in the group activities, it is termed as observation under natural conditions. But when you introduce a stimulus to the group, for the group to react to that stimulus, and you observe the reaction towards that stimulus, it is called as a controlled observation. For instance, in that prison example, you want to see how prisoners react to ethnically different inmate. So you will introduce a new prisoner from different ethnic background to see how already existing prisoners react to that new prisoner who is from different ethnic background. That is called as a controlled observation. So you can either conduct observation in its natural setting, or you can introduce a stimulus and do observation in the controlled set as well. Observation research come with its own challenges. The two main challenges regarding observational research includes a Hawthorne effect and observer bias. Uh, Hawthorne effect is basically when individuals or groups become aware that they are being observed, and when they become aware that they are being observed, they may change their behavior. This is called as Hawthorne effect. The use of observation in such a situation may introduce distortion, as what is being observed may not represent the normal behavior of the participants. Uh, Secondly, regarding the observer bias, if the observer, if you as a researcher, if you are not impartial, then you can easily introduce bias, and there is no easy way to verify the observations and the inferences drawn from them. Basically, when you are engaged in the observer bias, the interpretations which you draw from the group activities, they will be largely influenced by your bias. But the readers, they don't have any way to confirm whether there was any biasness or not. So this is something which is very difficult to identify. This is something which is very difficult to verify or authenticate. So these are the two important challenges which are very normal in the observational settings. Okay. So when we talk about observation, how we can collect data through observations, we have three main methods of collecting data through observations. We can collect data through narrative recording, we can collect data through electronic devices, or we can collect data through categorical recording. So let us discuss them one by one. So narrative recording is a type of data collection where researcher records a description of the interaction among the group members in his or her own words. So such a type of recording clearly falls in the domain of qualitative research. So usually a researcher makes brief notes while observing the interaction, and then soon after completing the observation makes detailed notes in narrative form. So as researchers interpret the interactions, there is a risk of interpretation being influenced by researchers' own biases. But nonetheless, it is an effective way to make observation, to get deep insight. So there is a high chance of narrative recording being influenced by the researchers' own bias. But it is also one of the best ways to get deep insights about the group. So this is one of the ways to collect data through observation. Secondly, you can also collect data through electronic devices. In this way, the researcher can see the interaction or listen to the interaction a number of times before interpreting it or drawing any conclusions from it. But on the other hand, there is a risk of Hawthorne effect, which we discussed in our last slide, because recordings can make your participants whom you are observing uncomfortable, and they may behave differently before a camera. So basically, when you are recording the observations, when you are recording the interactions, there is a risk of Hawthorne effect, which we discussed in our last slide. Okay. Lastly, the third important way to organize data through observation is the categorical recording. So sometimes a researcher may decide to record his or her observations using categories or developing scales. For instance, consider the example given in this slide. These are the categories to measure the nature of interactions in the group. Now, there are various characteristics of interaction which are given on this scale. like participation, like rapport between the group members, among the group members, confidence of the group members, aggressiveness, withdrawnness, friendliness, aloofness. So these are the different aspects of interaction within a group, and using these characteristics, using these criteria, a researcher can categorize those aspects of interaction as either positive, negative, or neutral. So these are the three judgment tools. So for instance, if you see that the participants they have a high rapport with each other, so and you consider that it is a positive thing, then you may select high positivity or low positivity depending upon the level of rapport you uh, as an observer interpret in the group interactions. So this is one of the ways to collect data through observations, but using categories to record observations, it may be beneficial as you do not need to spend time on taking detailed notes, and it can help you concentrate more on the observation. It can help you concentrate more on the action that is taking place in front of your eyes. But the problem with using scale or using categorical recording is that it does not provide specific and in-depth information about the interaction. So this is one of the downfalls of using categorical recording. So we have discussed the three observational data collection techniques. Uh, so the first one, the narrative recording, it falls under the the category of qualitative research. The recording on electronic devices, it is more on the lines of qualitative research. But if you are doing categorical recording, it is more aligned with the quantitative research. So even when you are doing observation, you can collect quantitative data as well, depending upon your requirement. Okay, so this is one of the first data collection methods in the primary sources of data. Now let us discuss the second data collection method, interviews. Okay, so interviews can be categorized into two main domains: unstructured interviews and structured interviews. The main difference between the unstructured and structured interviews, it rely greatly on the flexibility in terms of content of interview questions, flexibility in terms of the wording of the questions, flexibility in terms of the order of asking questions. So depending upon these three criterions, interviews can be classified as either unstructured or structured. So when you as a researcher or as an interviewer, you have the freedom to think about and formulate questions as they come to your mind around the issue that is being investigated. That it is called as unstructured interview. And in those situations where you need to keep strictly to the questions decided beforehand, you need to stick to that format, including the wordings, including the sequence of the questions and the manner in which the questions are asked. That particular situation falls within the category of structured interviews. So we can classify, our interviews as either being unstructured or structured, depending upon the flexibility or rigidity we have in asking questions, in formulating questions, in terms of the sequence of the questions or the wordings of the questions. But when you talk about the unstructured interviews, uh, the strength of unstructured interviews is the almost complete freedom they provide in terms of content and structure. But this also shows that unstructured interviews require great interviewing skills, as you need to raise issues on the spur of the moment. While in the structured interviews, researcher asks a predetermined set of questions which require fewer interviewing skills. So, if you're going for unstructured interviews, you need to have greater interviewing skills. Okay, so let me give you an example of unstructured interview, so you can get an understanding about interviewing skills. So the unstructured interviews, They open with a very broad question. For instance, the question here is that tell me something about your unit and department and perhaps even the organization as a whole in terms of work, employees, and whatever else you think is important. Now, this is a very broad question, and such a question might produce an elaborated response from some people, and others may just say that everything is fine. So following the leads from the more vocal persons is easy. If your respondent is talkative, if your respondent is vocal, then following the leads from that respondent is relatively easy. But if your respondent is shy, if your respondent is not comfortable in answering the questions, then following the lead from that person is quite difficult. Okay, so for instance, if your respondent gives a very short reply that is not informative, that is not meaningful for your interview, then you as an interviewer, you need to utilize your interviewing skills, and you need to, you have to ask questions that call for details and they cannot be answered in one or two words. Such questions might be phrased like, like this one, that I would like to know something about your job. Please describe to me in detail the things you do in your job on a typical day from morning till evening. Okay, so in that particular situation, answering to this question will require a respondent to provide details. So respondent will start telling you details about how a typical work day is like for that respondent from the morning till evening. So you can ask then several questions as a follow-up to the answers which are given by the respondent. So for instance, if your respondent is still very hesitant to give you detailed answers and tell you that everything is fine in this organization and everything is very good in my unit, so you can ask the question which elicits more categorical responses, which elicits more absolute responses. For instance, you can ask, compared to other units in this organization, what are the strengths and weaknesses of your unit? Okay, now this is a very categorical answer, a question, and your respondent might need to give you an absolute answer. But just imagine that your respondent is giving you a very diplomatic answer and telling you that everything is fine, everything is good in my unit and overall in this organization. And you can probe more deeply in that particular dimension, that what is contributing to this positivity, why employees so much positive about this organization, why employees so much positive about working here. So you can ask the question that, okay, that is great, tell me what contributes to this effectiveness of your unit, because most other organizations, they usually experience several difficulties. Okay, so now such a questioning technique, it usually brings the respondent's defenses down and make him or her more comfortable to share information. So even everything is right, you would want to know that what is contributing to this effectiveness, this positivity in that organization. So encouraging the respondents to talk about both the good things and those not so good things in the unit can elicit a lot of information, whereas some respondents, they do not need much encouragement to speak, others do. So simple and short and easy questions to respond to can be asked to respondents if they need more encouragement to speak. Questions like, what do you like about working here? If you were to tell me which aspects of your job you like and which you do not, what would they be? So such questions can produce a lot of meaningful information for you as a researcher to record. So you need to keep in mind these interviewing skills, these interviewing techniques. I will discuss them in my next slide as well. Okay, so what is the relationship between structured and unstructured interviews? Some researchers and some people think that they are not related, but they are very much related. They are very much interrelated. How they are interrelated? Because after conducting a sufficient number of unstructured interviews with employees at several levels and studying the data obtained, the researcher would know the variables that need greater focus and that call for more in-depth exploration. So this sets the stage for the interviewer to conduct further structured interviews in the area identified in the unstructured interviewing level. For instance, while doing unstructured interviews, you identify that employee commitment is one of the most important levels which need to be focused, or the loyalty with the organizations. It is a very important area that needs to be focused. So these two areas are identified. Or leadership is another area which needs to be focused. So these are the two areas or three areas which you need to focus during your structured interviews. So when you are conducting structured interviews, you only focus on these particular areas. So in unstructured interview, you discover the most pertinent issues, more important issues, and in the structured interviews, you focus upon only on those issues. So the purpose of unstructured interviews is different, and the purpose of structured interviews are different. So they are very much interrelated. So how to conduct a structured interview? Structured interviews, as the name implies, they are more structured, they are more logical, they are more orderly. So the first part of your structured interview, it includes the introduction section. You as an interviewer, you need to introduce yourself. You need to tell about the purpose of your interview. You need to assure confidentiality. You need to ask permission to record the interview. And then the questions in the structured interview can be arranged in the logical order. First, warm-up can be asked, those questions which are easy to answer, and then those questions can be asked which are more difficult to answer, which are more, threatening, as per the situation. So first you need to ask the non-threatening questions, which are called as warm-up questions, and then you can ask more serious questions as you go down the interview. So as the respondents express their views, you as a researcher, you need to note down or record them. The same questions, the same format will be asked to different respondents, and until you receive sufficient number of responses, you need to continue conducting interviews. So what is the sufficient number of responses? What is the sufficient number of interviews while when you are using interviewing as your research strategy? So the number of interviews is something which we will discuss in our sampling strategies, because this is a sampling issue. So we will discuss in detail that what number of interviews is a good number of sample size. It could be a representative sample size. So the number of interviews, the issue will be discussed in our next session when we discuss the sampling size. Okay, so now we will discuss some interviewing techniques. The first important interviewing technique, it is funneling technique. I think as the name implies, a funneling technique is especially important during unstructured interview. At the beginning of an unstructured interview, you can ask more broad questions. It is advisable to ask more broad questions to get a broad idea about the situation. For example, a question that could be asked would be, what are some of the feelings about working for this organization? What are your feelings about working in this organization? So from the responses to this broad question, you can ask further questions that are progressively more focused and more, more related to the, the responses that are given in the first question. So funneling technique can be asked. You can follow from, from broad to the more focused. The second important thing is unbiased. You need to ask unbiased questions. Because if you don't ask unbiased questions, then you introduce systematic bias to the research process, and which is very difficult to identify, and your results will be highly affected by it. For instance, if you want to know about the experiences of the people regarding their job, a simple question would be like, tell me how you experienced your job. It is a better question than asking people that The work you must do be really boring. It must be really difficult. Let me hear your experiences about it. Now, this is a very emotionally loaded question, and it will influence the response expected from the respondents. You need to ask unbiased questions in both your unstructured and your structured interviews. Third very important issue is that you need to clarify important points in your interviews. You need to clarify them. To make sure that the researcher understand issues as the respondent intends to represent them, it is very important to rephrase that information which is particularly important, which is particularly pertinent to the content of your interviews. So, for instance, if your respondent says that there is an unfair promotion policy in this organization, female employees are overlooked in promotion. Now, you as a researcher need to confirm that what you interpret is exactly what respondent intend to say. Now, in this particular situation, researcher might ask that, so you are saying that male employees always get promoted over equally capable female employees. Now, rephrasing in this way clarifies the issue of whether or not the respondent considers capability an important factor while discussing gender discrimination in promotion policy of his or her firm. This is something you need to do while conducting interviews. You need to clarify important issues by, rephrasing your questions and, confirming that what you interpret is exactly what respondent intend to say. Okay, sometimes your respondents, they are not very expressive in their opinion. They're not able to verbalize their perceptions or their replies. So all they, answer is, I don't know, or all is fine, everything is good in this organization. In such instances, you need to help your respondents think through the issue. So, you can do so by asking questions in a more simpler way, by asking questions in, in a way that is more, non-threatening in nature. You can rephrase your questions. So when your respondents are not able to verbalize their, perceptions, then you need to help your respondents to think through the issue. And this is, equally applicable in both structured interviews and unstructured interviews. Okay, so when we talk about interviews, there are basically four different mediums of interviews. You can conduct face-to-face interviews, you can conduct telephone interviews, you can conduct computer-assisted interviews, or you can conduct online interviews. Okay, so face-to-face interviews are especially relevant when you are conducting unstructured interviews. Okay, so it is very important if you are conducting unstructured interviews that you are, you are having a face-to-face encounter with your respondent. So telephone interviews and online interviews, they can be structured in nature because you have already all the questions in an orderly manner. You have a predetermined set of questions, so you can ask, structured questions through a telephone medium or online medium as well. Computer assisted interviews, they are generally conducted through softwares where predetermined set of questions are fed into the system, and mostly corporations or organizations, they use computer assisted interviews when they want to know about the quality of their services, quality of their product. They want to know about the perception of the customers. So mostly corporations are using, utilizing this computer assisted interviews technique. Okay, so this is about interviews. If you have any question so far regarding the lecture, we have discussed secondary sources of data. We have discussed two important primary sources of data, interviews and observations. Any questions so far? Any ambiguity about the topic which we have discussed so far? Any question regarding any ambiguity, any problem? Okay, so okay, how many interviewers we need? Okay, we discussed in our last slide as well that the number of interviews is the topic which which we will discuss during our sampling session. So usually the number of interviews is not you're not required to conduct lots of interviews. Like for instance, if you are utilizing questionnaires as a data collection method, then you may require to have 200 questionnaires or 300 questionnaires depending upon your research instrument, etc. But when we talk about interviews, the number of interviews is pretty less. It is quite less as compared to the questionnaire. So we will discuss this topic in detail in our sampling session about when we will be discussing about the sampling size. We will discuss this topic in detail, that how many interviews are needed. Okay. Okay, so now let us discuss the third important part of our session, which is the questionnaires. Now, reading your assignment number one, I realized that most of the students, they will be utilizing questionnaires to collect data. So that's why I will be paying, a lot of attention to this topic. So when we talk about questionnaires, they are a predetermined, written set of questions to which respondents record their answers, usually within the closely defined alternatives. So questionnaires are generally designed to collect large number of quantitative data. So you need to differentiate, between different questionnaire types. The questionnaires can be personally administered, they can be collectively administered, they can be mailed, they can be collected electronically as well. So when the survey is confined to a local area, a good way to collect data is through personal administration. For instance, if you are only collecting data from students in your campus, in your university, so one of the best ways to collect data would be through personal administration, because then you will be able to clarify any doubts about the issue. You will be able to express your motivation regarding the issue. You will be able to tell the goals of your research, and you will be able to get very good responses, because you will be clearing any doubts that your respondents have about the issue. But you can also use collective administration. For instance, if you can collectively administer your questionnaire in your class, and your class size is 40 students, for instance, so you can all you can invite them to a class, or when a teacher leaves the class, you can take the time of the class. You can rotate your questionnaires, you can print them, or you can send them through link, and then you can collectively administer them. And it is very easy to collectively administer them, because in 15 to 20 minutes you will be able to collect 40 responses. So collective administration means that when you are personally administering questionnaires over a large population, it is called as collective administration. Like if you are getting your class to fill your questionnaires, then it will be a collective administration. So it is pretty easy. It is it consumes less time, and it does not require much skill to administer a questionnaire than it does to conduct interviews. The third way is to mail your questionnaires or post your questionnaires. Now, this is not email, this is mail. Okay, when you courier your questionnaires. This method has long been the backbone of business research, but with the arrival of the internet, mobile phones, and social networks, mail questionnaires, they have become lesser popular among researchers, and it is being fastly replaced by online or electronic questionnaires. So this is the most popular, type of research, of most popular data collection method these days, which is collecting data electronically through questionnaires, because it is easy, it is fast, and all you have to do is to email the invitations to complete a survey, post a link on a website, or use social networks like WeChat, Facebook, or WhatsApp. So there are lots of tools or websites available where you can construct your questionnaires electronically. I personally use Google Documents, Google Docs to construct my questionnaire electronically. But keeping the limitations we have in China, it will not be advisable for you to use Google Docs because not all people have access to the Google Doc links. So you should use those tools which are more easier to reach in China. And I can't recall that there are some websites which are very popular in China because I use them in collecting data for during my postdoc research. So I will share with you during my in the WeChat group. Okay. So these are the four data collection methods which you can use through questionnaires. So let us discuss their strengths and weaknesses. I will particularly focus upon the personally administered questionnaires and electronic questionnaires. Because most of you will be using one of these two techniques. Okay, so when we talk about personally administered questionnaire, the main advantage is that researcher or a member of research team can collect all the completed responses within a short period of time. So it saves your time. Or any doubts that the respondents might have on any question can also be clarified, on the spot. So this is a very important thing because if you can clear any doubts, you will get a quality response, you will get a meaningful response. So all the doubts about a questionnaire can be clarified on the spot. And the researcher also has the opportunity to introduce the research topic and motivate the respondents to offer their frank answers. And this helps establish the rapport between the researcher and the respondents, which is very important to get a quality response as well. And especially when you are administering your questionnaire to large groups like your class, if you can get your class to sit through after the lecture is over, and then you can get them to fill your questionnaire. It is less expensive, it saves your time, and 100% response rate is ensured. Now response rate is that the proportion of your questionnaires which are completed and which are returned. For instance, okay, I will discuss it in in an electronic questionnaires as well. For instance, when you email or you share 100 questionnaires and only 25 are returned and only 25 are completed and returned, then the response rate is 25%. And this is not a very bad response rate because it is recommended that a response rate of 30% is pretty reasonable. It is acceptable. But in the personal administration, the questionnaires which are administered under you personally as a researcher, response rate of 100% can be ensured because you are there on the spot. You are doing one-on-one interaction with the respondents. So this is one of the main advantage, and this is a very important aspect of personally administering questionnaires. But one of the main disadvantage is that researcher might introduce bias in the personal administration, because if you are explaining a research topic to different respondents and your explanation is not consistent, you're explaining your research topic, you're explaining your research purpose differently to different respondents, then it means that different respondents have different understanding of your research topic and they will respond you differently as well. So there is a risk of introducing a bias through personal administration as well. Okay, it is time consuming as well because usually the sample size is pretty large when you are using questionnaires. For instance, if your sample size is 300 and it takes you 20 minutes to fill each questionnaire, then you can do the maths, like it will take you how much time to collect your. So it can be time consuming as well when you're using personally administered questionnaires. Okay, when you talk about electronic questionnaires, Online questionnaires are gaining popularity because of the ability to reach wide audiences, ability of the internet to access to the groups and individuals who would be difficult to reach through other channels. For instance, we discussed in that international students paper that how they were accessed through WeChat conveniently as compared to gaining access to them physically in different campuses all over China. So it was more easy to reach them through online channels as well. So it is they are basically the reach of the electronic questionnaires is very high. And if you are if for instance if your population is geographically distributed like international students, they were studying in different universities across China, those researchers utilized WeChat as one of the mediums to get access to them. It can be a very smart way to reach them as well. Okay, so there are some difficulties as well. The most important problem in the electronic questionnaire is the response rate, and the response rate is very problematic issue in the electronic questionnaires because it can directly impact on your representativeness of the sample. For instance, if you have electronically distributed your questionnaire to 100 people and 50 are males and 50 are females. Okay, so at the end you receive only 25 completed responses, and in those 25 completed responses 20 are males and 5 are females. So the representativeness of your sample is extremely unbalanced because earlier you planned that yeah, half of your questionnaires were sent to the male members and half of your questionnaires were sent to the female population, and you expected that you will get responses equally in equal proportion from them. But when you got the response rate, you got 25 completed questionnaires back, and in those 25 questionnaires majority are male members and only few female members replied to you. So your initial idea was that your sample should be equally distributed between males and females, but at the end of your, when you receive the completed responses, your sample was highly skewed or highly tilted towards male population. So when the response rate is low, it can, have a severe impact on the representativeness of the sample, and it is not possible to generalize your findings when you don't have a representative sample. So you need to keep these things in mind that your sample is representative. Otherwise, your research results will not be generalized to a larger population. So this example, this is a very simple example which can help you at why low response rates or how low response rates can directly impact on the representativeness of your sample. Another important thing about the online questionnaires is that respondents perceive uninvited or unsolicited requests to fill data as an invasion of privacy, and they often consider them as spam. Therefore, you need to approach respondents electronically in a professional way. A proper cover letter needs to be prepared explaining the motivations of research and ensuring respondents about their privacy, and then inviting them to take part in a survey through a link. This you can do this in a professional way, and your electronic questionnaires will not be perceived as spam or will not be perceived as rude by your respondents. So these are the strengths and weaknesses of these two important data collection tools. You can go through these strengths and weaknesses and decide for yourself that which is more, applicable, which is more suitable for your research investigation. Okay. So now I will discuss briefly the guidelines for designing your questionnaires. These are very important because you need to keep these in mind, and they have a direct impact on the quality of your responses. So the first important guideline is regarding the principles of wording. Uh, your questions should be, worded in a very simple language. The language used should not be sophisticated. Uh, so the language of the questionnaire should approximate the level of understanding of your respondents, especially when your populations they do not understand the language of the questionnaire. For instance, if you are conducting research in China, and you're conducting research among the Chinese adult population, I will advise you to translate your questionnaire to Chinese language, because if you are asking questions in English language, it will be difficult for them to understand. Now, if you are translating a questionnaire to the Chinese language, you need to use double translation method. There is a protocol to translate as well. So in double translation method, the first step is to translate from English to Chinese. This is the first step. You will translate your questionnaire from English to Chinese. And the second step would be translate it back from Chinese to English. Now, this is the second step of your, double translation method. The third step is to, compare both versions. So when you are using double translation method, the first step is to translate your questionnaire from English to the Chinese language. The second step is to translate it back from Chinese language to English language. And the third step is to compare both versions, both pre-translated version and post-translated version, because sometimes you are not able to translate some words due to local, cultural thing, or due to the local semantic in the of the language. There are some words which cannot be translated exactly into the Chinese language. So you need to see that the translated version is as much closer to the actual version as possible. So you need to ensure this, and you need to ensure that both the versions they convey the same meaning. And if they don't convey the same meaning, if any word is particularly affecting the meaning of the statements, then you need to adopt it. You need to change it. So this is the double translation method, and you need to complete this double translation method before administering your questionnaires to the general population. So only translating your questionnaires to the Chinese language is not sufficient. You need to translate it back to English language, and then you need to compare both versions and make necessary modifications where possible. So this is the double translation method, especially when you are administering your questionnaire to the Chinese population. Okay. Secondly, you need to pay attention to the type of questions which you will ask. So it is advisable that you include open-ended questions, because in a questionnaire you cannot expect to include all the aspects of a particular variable. Okay. So now in questionnaires we are measuring variables, and we cannot expect to include all the aspects of a particular variable. So it is good to give an open-ended question at the end of your questionnaire. So it will help your respondent to make those suggestions which are not covered in your questionnaire. So close-ended questions, it help the respondents to make quick decisions to choose among the several alternatives before them. Like the question here is asked, are you satisfied with the overall educational quality of this course? You have to choose among these 5 responses. You don't have to think much. You just have to choose one of these 5 responses. But if you are asked that what aspects of this course you find more satisfying, and what aspects you think that needs improvement, then you need to think a lot. So in close-ended questions, respondents are able to make quick decisions, and well, because all the aspects are not covered in the close-ended question, so that therefore an open-ended question is also asked. So if a respondent has agreed with the overall education quality of the course, then they will tell in detail here that which aspects they found more satisfying. So you will get deeper insights to the answers. So you will be able to better integrate your open-ended questions and close-ended questions, and interpret the overall quality in a better way when you will compare the close-ended responses with the open-ended responses. Okay, so this is the second important part. The third important part is the form of questions. The form of questions refers to whether the question is positively worded or negatively worded. So instead of phrasing all questions positively, it is advisable to include some negatively worded questions as well. So the tendency of respondents to mechanically circle all the answers at one end of the scale, it could be minimized. For instance, in your slide, there are questions like this is a scale to measure the involvement level of employees with their jobs. So the first question is, my work is very interesting, and the 1 stands for strongly disagree, and 7 and 5 stands for strongly agree. Okay. So for instance, if I find my job pretty interesting, and I'm involved in my job and I like my job, so I will say yes, I agreed that I like my job, I find my work very interesting. Now, if it is asked, in the second question, it is asked, I am not engrossed in my work all day. Now, this is a negatively worded question. The first question is positively worded, but the second question is negatively worded. Now, the reason we are using a negatively worded question here is that we don't want our respondents to give mechanical answers. Now, just by reading the first question, I would, have this perception that all these questions are about my work interest. So I will click like this in my questionnaires, and you will see that many respondents have the tendency to use mechanical responses, use mechanical responding for their in their questionnaires. So in order to minimize this, in order to keep your respondents alert, you introduce negatively worded questions. So for instance, if the second question is that I am not engrossed in my work all day. Now this is opposite of what I'm feeling, because I am engrossed in my work all day. So I would say strongly disagree or disagree. This would be my answer, not this, because if I am answering this, I am contradicting with my first answer as well. So this is one of the ways for you to also have a check that whether respondents have paid attention to your questionnaire, and if respondents are not attentive while answering your questions, then it means that you might need to discard that questionnaire. This is very important that you use principles of wording by using more both the positively worded questions and negatively worded questions. Use of negatively worded questions keep your respondents attentive, it keeps them alert, and it discourages them from using mechanical responding, like responding all in on the one side of your scale. Okay, so this is a very important thing, and I often receive questions that there are many questionnaires which are contradicting with each other. Like, for instance, one respondent has said that my work is very interesting. He is strongly agreed, but I'm not engrossed in my work all day. He strongly agreed. A life without my work would be dull. Strongly agreed. Now, this is a very questionable response, because if this is correct, if he or she is not engrossed in the work all day, then either he is lying here or lying here, because if this is correct, then this cannot be correct, and this cannot be correct. So this is something which you need to take into consideration. You need to design both types of questions, and it will help you check whether the questions have been, the questionnaire have been responded attentively or not. Okay. The fourth point, the length of the questions. You need to keep your questions short, and overall there is a prevailing thought that the questions should not exceed the length more than 20 words. So a question should have a single statement should have 20 words and not more than 20 words. Okay. The fifth important part of principles of wording is that you should not ask ambiguous questions. Ambiguously worded questions, may confuse the respondents, and respondent may not be sure what exactly they mean. For instance, if you ask the respondent that, to what extent would you say that you are happy? Now, this is an ambiguous question because it is difficult for respondents to decide whether the question refers to their state of happiness in the workplace or at home or in life general. So thus responses to the ambiguous questions have built-in bias, and as different respondents perceive them differently. So you should not ask the ambiguous questions. Avoid double-barreled questions. Now, double-barreled questions are those statements which have two thoughts in the same statement. Double-barreled questions are those statements which have two questions incorporated into the single statement, like you work hard and score good marks in your exams. Now, working hard is another thing, scoring good marks is another thing. You cannot mix them together. So if you want to ask these questions, do you work hard and score good marks, you need to divide them into two questions. First would be related to the hard work, and second would be related to the good marks. Okay. The seventh important part is that you should avoid leading questions. Leading questions, are phrased in such a way that lead the respondent to give responses that the researcher would like them to give. By asking a leading question, you are signaling and pressuring respondents to agree with your or disagree with your statement. For instance, business research is a difficult subject. It must be boring to study. You are leading your respondent to agree with your statement, and you will see many agreements here. Avoid questions based on assumptions, assuming that aliens attack us. Will you fight against them? Again, this is an assumption, and you cannot be asking those questions which rely on the assumptions, because you cannot expect to get right answers when you are basing your questions on the assumptions. You should avoid loaded questions. Loaded questions are emotionally charged questions. If, for instance, if you ask, to what extent do you think plagiarism software is a gross misrepresentation of the authenticity check, as it directly affect on the student hard work? Now, this is a loaded question, because the words gross misrepresentation and students hard work, they are emotionally charged terms, and the question is written in such a way that you will be agreeing with this, because I know all of you how much you dislike the plagiarism software. So it is a loaded question. You should avoid recall dependent questions, because the memories which are very far in your memory, those experiences which you have experienced many years ago, they would be hazy in your memory. So answers to such questions will have inbuilt bias. So for instance, if you're required to recall your primary school experiences, it would be it would be like good 7-8 years ago. So it would not be a good question to ask. Lastly, avoid socially desirable questions. Questions should not be worded in such a way that they produce socially desirable responses. For instance, a question such as, do you think that older people should be laid off? Now, it would elicit a response of no or disagreement, mainly because society does not like that person who says that elderly people should be fired even if they are capable of performing their jobs satisfyingly. So you need to avoid asking socially desirable questions as well. Second important guideline for your questionnaire design is the sequencing of your questions. Questions of general nature should be asked and four, and then you can ask more specific questions after that. And those questions which are more uh, easy to answer, they could be asked first, and then more difficult questions could be asked, especially in while your sequencing of questions should be following the funneling approach. So this is all of part of funneling approach, that the questions which are more broad, more general in nature, they should be asked before you ask specifying questions. So you should be using funneling approach in arranging the order of questions in your questionnaire. And another important thing is that do not place positively worded and similarly negatively worded questions together. It is advisable not to place together a positively worded and a negatively worded question, tapping the same element or dimension of the concept. Now, for instance, if you are putting two questions, like mentioned in the slide, that I have opportunities to interact with my colleagues, and I have no opportunities or few opportunities to interact with my colleagues during work hours. Now, these are the questions. This is a negatively worded question, but it has only included no here. Okay, it has only included few here. So such negatively worded questions, they are not, advisable to ask, especially not place them together. For instance, in our previous slide, we have seen a negatively worded question, but it is asked in a very, smart way. If it were asked like this, my work is very interesting, and the second question would be like, my work is not interesting. Now, this would be a very awkward way of placing negatively worded question. So even when you are using negatively worded question, arrange them in such a way that they do not tap the same element or dimension of a concept by just an addition of a negative word. Okay, because it does not look very intelligent, or it does not look very smart. So you should not be using negatively worded question just by introducing a no in your statement. Organize them in a very intelligent manner, and do not place them together, even if you are asking them like in a way that they are tapping the same element. Now it is the first question, the positively worded question, it is tapping the interaction with colleagues during work hours. And the second question is tapping the same thing but in the negative way. So you should not place them together if they are tapping the same statement, the same dimension, one in a positive way and the other in a negative way. This is something which you need to take into consideration. Third important part is classifying your personal information. Now you need to collect information regarding age, income levels, education, gender. The information is very important, and it is best not to ask for the name of the respondent in order to maintain anonymity. So whether questions seeking personal information should appear at the beginning or at the end of the questionnaire, it is a matter of choice for the researcher. Some researchers ask for personal data at the end rather than in the beginning of the questionnaire. And their reasoning may be that by the time the respondent reaches the end of the questionnaire, he or she has been convinced of the legitimacy or the genuineness of the questions framed by the researcher. And therefore, they are more inclined to share personal information. But if researchers who prefer to get the personal information at the beginning, they have their own reasons. They believe that once respondents have shared some of their personal history, information about their age, their income, their background, they may have psychologically identified themselves with the questionnaire, and they may feel a commitment to respond. So thus, whether you ask for the information about the personal information at the beginning or at the end of the questionnaire, it is a matter of your individual choice. But it is a wise policy to ask for personal information through a range of responses rather than seeking the exact figures. For instance, if you are asking about the income, it is better to ask the in the range rather than asking them to write down the exact figures. Writing down the exact figure is awkward. And age as well, you can write down the age categories, and do not you should not ask exact age as well, because it is more comfortable for respondents to tell their age in the categories. Okay, lastly, how you should arrange your questionnaire, different parts of your questionnaire. So general appearance of your questionnaire is like it should have four parts. The first part is the introduction section. The second part is the personal information. Now you can put it in the end as well, but I have put it in the second part. The third part is the measurement of your variables. Now this is the operationalization, which we have been discussing a lot. And the last part is about your thank you note. So your first part of your questionnaire, you will uh, tell the respondents about the purpose of the research. You will explain the reason, the goal of the research. Then you will tell them, ensure them about the confidentiality, assure them about the anonymity, that the responses will remain anonymous. Tell them that their responses will not be used for commercial purposes. This is only an academic research. This is only for scientific usage, not for commercial usage, because people tend to get very skeptical if their responses are being used for commercial purposes. And lastly, tell them where they can contact you. You should have a contact point as well. You can give your email address, you can give your phone number, depends upon you. So I usually give email addresses for my questionnaire design. So you can give them your contact point. So if you have any ambiguity, they can reach to you as well, especially during electronic when you are using electronic questionnaires. Okay. So the second part is about personal information. You can ask about gender, age, monthly income, education level, depending upon the relevant demographic characteristics which you want to include in your research. So you can include other demographic characteristics as well, like their marital status, like if you are asking questions about from employees, their experience level, etc., depending upon the purpose of your research. Okay, the third part is about your variables, measurement of variables. So this is a very simple pattern. You can ask the questions, and in the front of questions, right in adjacent to your questions, you can have these categories. So these categories are clearly identified as what 1 stands for, what 2 stands for, what 7 stands for. So everything is very clearly identified to the respondent. So respondent just look at that. This is a strongly disagreement. So I will choose this one, or I will choose this one, or I will choose this one. So it is upon the respondent. Okay. The last part of your questionnaire is about thanking the respondent, and it should include an open-ended question as well, allowing respondents to comment on any aspect they choose. And the questionnaire should end on a courteous note, reminding the respondents to check that all items in the questionnaire have been completed. So it should end with the expression of sincere thanks to the respondents. So you can ask them about their experiences of filling the questionnaire, ranging from happiness to the extremely unpleasant about filling the questionnaire. Okay, so this is the general appearance of your questionnaire. So lastly, I would discuss methods of data collection in your qualitative research. We have discussed about the unstructured interviews in detail. We have discussed about the observational data collection method in detail in the beginning of our session. In-depth interviews, which is called as theoretical sampling as well. We have discussed this in our last session when we were discussing the grounded theory approach, that information rich participants shall be used as well. So you can utilize these methods to collect data for qualitative research. Focus group interviews can also be used by researcher. Focus groups, they typically consist of 8 to 10 members with a moderator. Moderator is a researcher leading the discussions on a particular topic or a concept. So members are generally chosen on the basis of their familiarity with the topic on which information is sought. For instance, women with children may compose a focus group to identify how organizations can help working mothers. Students with consistent A grades may compose a focus group to identify best strategies to score high marks. So the moderator, the researcher in the focus group plays a vital role in steering the discussions in a manner which is relevant to the point and keep the members on track. You can also use narratives. We have discussed the narrative recording in observation as well. So narratives can be used as a qualitative research method as well, especially when the person or your participant tells story about an incident or situation and you as a researcher listen passively. So narratives are a very powerful method of data collection for situations which are sensitive in nature. For example, you may want to find out about the impact of workplace harassment or workplace abuse on people who have gone through that experience. So you as a researcher ask these people to narrate their experiences and how they have been affected by these experiences. So narratives can be also one of the ways to collect qualitative research data. Okay, so these are the methods of uh, collecting data for qualitative research purposes. Now, which data collection method is the most appropriate method? Now, there is no definite answer to this question because it largely depends upon your type of data which you are using. If you're using primary data or secondary data, then your data collection method, change drastically. The nature of your investigation, it is qualitative or quantitative, it also, change, drastically. The geographical distribution of your study population, whether your study population is geographically sparse or geographically concentrated, it also plays a very important role. For instance, geographically concentrated population, you can use personally administered questionnaires. For geographically sparse population, you can use electronic questionnaires. So it depends upon your geographical distribution of your population as well. Your resources, your time, because of time limits, we cannot use some very important data collection methods. And the research strategy you are using, the experimental, survey, or mixed method, which research strategy are you using, it also has a role to play in deciding upon your data collection method. Lastly, research type. If your research is exploratory in nature, you will usually rely on unstructured interviews and structured interviews. And if your study is on the cause and effect relationship, maybe you will be more focused on the questionnaires. So your data collection method is dependent upon these important factors, and you need to take into consideration these factors before deciding upon your data collection method. Okay, so this is it for today. Any questions so far before we discuss our activity for this week? Any ambiguity, any question about today's session? Any question, any ambiguity, anything which is not clear so far? Okay, so let me explain this week's activity. You are supposed to read the methodology section of the papers which you have cited in your literature review, read other relevant papers as well, and see how other researchers have investigated the similar issues and collected data. Now you are supposed to do these three things. First of all, you need to categorically, write down what is your data collection method. How do you plan to collect your data to solve your research problem? Justify this that the method you have chosen is the best way to collect data. Secondly, why you have not chosen an alternative method. We have discussed several methods of data collection in today's session. You need to justify that why other methods were not appropriate for your research problem. Thirdly, you need to evaluate the post of 3 other students, evaluate their justification for their chosen data collection method, and you can critique them, you can advise them, you can help them improve their data collection method. And you need to be articulate and eloquent in your responses. The deadline for the initial post is 23rd October, and the deadline for responses is 25th October. So this discussion question will help you write down your assignment number 3. And let me give you a brief outlook of your assignment number 3 as well. So your assignment number 3 is about your research proposal. It carries 150 points. You need to follow this particular method, this particular template for your research proposal. The first 3 part of your research proposal are basically, you have already accomplished them in your assignment number 1 and assignment number 2. So the first 3 part have a limitation of word limit of 350 words. So the first 3 parts shall only, shall not cross 350 words. But what I am more interested in is, the part number 4 to 10, your study design. You need to refer to the section, unit number 6 recording to write down about your decision choices of study design. What data collection method you will be using, what will be your sampling strategy, what will be your research instruments, what are different ethical issues, what analytical methods you will use, what are the anticipated limitations of your research and time frame of your research. So the time frame of your research would be same for all the people, all the students, like September to December. Okay, so this would be your time frame for the research. So this is your research proposal. So your research proposal has 2 parts. The first part is it consists of the first 3 sections which you have already discussed in your assignment number 1 and assignment number 2. You just need to summarize them into 350 words, and the part number 4 to part number 10, this is new addition to your research proposal. So this is your format of your research proposal. The deadline for submission is 10th November. You still have around 20 days left for your research proposals, assignment. Your word limit should be between 1300 to 1500 words. And I'm expecting that 350 words, you should not exceed 350 words for the first 3 sections. And for all other sections, you need to write down, in total, your research proposal should be between 1300 to 1500 words, excluding references. The plagiarism is 10%, excluding references. Okay, so you need to ensure that these 350 words, they will only count for 10% of your plagiarism. So you need to rephrase some of your own words as well. Okay, I will maybe we can increase this percentage to 15% maybe, because of this requirement. So I will discuss this, I will make an announcement regarding this. Okay, you need to follow the format, the strict format, which we have been, which I have given you. And this is again a very important assignment. It constitutes 15% of your grade. So all the sections of this assignment, they are from your different units. You need to pay attention to different units and listen to the recordings. Any question regarding your DQ activity or assignment or this session? Any question today? No questions so far. Okay, so thank you very much for your time. If any question pops up in your mind regarding assignment number 3 or this week's discussion question or anything related to your session, please feel free to discuss with me. You can email me, you can ask me on WeChat. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye bye.